My name is Alex Carter, and before I ever shook their hands, my girlfriend's parents had already decided I wasn't good enough. Not wealthy enough. Not polished enough. Not one of them. But what happened that night proved something much deeper than bank accounts and silverware etiquette. It showed them what real character looks like. Before we begin, tell me what's the worst meet the parents experience you've ever had. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more true stories that flip the script. Let's rewind to that night. It started with a phone call from my girlfriend, Emma Sinclair. I was standing in my one-bedroom apartment, nervously adjusting the only suit I owned, when her voice came through the phone low, fast, and full of panic. "Alex, remember the plan," she said. "When my dad asks what you do, you're in specialized automotive consulting, not a garage owner. And if my mom asks about your hands, say you've been woodworking. Just, please don't mention engine oil or spark plugs." I chuckled to ease the tension. "Emma, come on. I'm a mechanic. That's who I am. I've built this shop from scratch. You know I'm proud of it." "I know, babe," she whispered, "and I love you for it. But they won't get it. Not tonight, just for a few hours. Can you play the part?" I sighed. For Emma, I'd play whatever part she needed, even if it meant pretending I wasn't the man I fought to become. Her parents, Charles and Margaret Sinclair, were the very definition of old money. Country clubs, cocktail parties, private jets. And I, with grease that never quite left my fingertips, represented everything they quietly despised. I scrubbed my hands raw, slipped into my best shoes, and climbed into my rebuilt '67 Ford F-100, a truck I'd restored bolt by bolt. As the skyline faded behind me, the city gave way to miles of gated estates, white fences, and perfection. And then, just as I began to believe I might actually pull this off, I saw her. An old woman, stranded on the side of a winding country road, standing next to a smoking 1963 Rolls-Royce Silver Cloud. What I did next would change everything. I almost kept driving. I really did. Every rational voice in my head screamed, "Keep going, Alex. You're already cutting it close. This isn't your problem tonight." But there was another voice, a quieter one. The voice that guided me in every restoration job, every late-night repair, the voice of the man I truly was. And that voice said, "That's a classic. That car needs help, and so does she." So I pulled over. The old woman was standing there, the picture of elegant frustration, tweed jacket, pearl earrings, her hair perfectly styled despite the countryside wind. She stared at the open hood like it had personally betrayed her. I stepped out of my truck and left my jacket behind. No point keeping it clean now. "Evening, ma'am," I said gently. "Need a hand?" She looked me up and down. I could see the flicker of curiosity behind her clear, sharp eyes. "It made a dreadful clunk," she said, and then gave up altogether. "My driver was supposed to follow me, but he seems to have vanished into the mist." "Mind if I take a look?" I asked, already stepping toward the engine. "I know a thing or two about these beauties." After a pause, she nodded. "Be my guest, young man." The moment I leaned into the open hood, I was home. The scent of aged leather and engine oil wrapped around me like an old friend. Within 30 seconds, I found the culprit, a frayed wire on the distributor cap, an easy fix for someone who knew what they were doing. "I can get her running again," I said, glancing at my hands. "But it's going to get messy." Her smile was small but warm. "If you can breathe life back into this old girl, I won't care if you come out looking like a chimney sweep." So I got to work. Pulled out my emergency toolkit, stripped the wire, reconnected it, taped it off, all while we talked. She didn't ask what I did for a living, only how I knew so much about this car. She loved it. I could tell. She was knowledgeable, sharp, and genuinely impressed with my touch. 20 minutes later, she turned the key, and that silver cloud purred like it had been waiting just for her. She lit up like Christmas morning. "You, young man, are a miracle worker," she said. "How can I possibly thank you?" "No thanks needed," I said honestly. "Just happy to see her back on the road." She nodded, eyes holding mine for just a second longer than expected. Then she drove off, a quiet queen reclaiming her throne. I stood there smiling, until I looked at my hands, covered in black grease. I looked at my watch. I was over an hour late. The Sinclairs would never believe this story, but I had no idea they wouldn't need to. Not yet. I rolled up to the Sinclair estate with a pit growing in my stomach. It wasn't a house, it was a statement. 3 stories of pristine brick and white columns, lit up like a luxury resort. The kind of place where silence echoed louder than conversation, and the gravel in the driveway was probably imported from Italy. My humble pickup truck looked like a barnyard animal parking next to a line of German show horses. I parked far down the circular drive and just sat there for a moment, staring at my hands, scrubbing them with a napkin from the glove box. Useless. The grease had already settled into the creases of my skin. I took a deep breath and stepped out. My shoes crunched against the gravel with every reluctant step. The massive wooden front doors loomed ahead like judgment itself. When Emma opened the door, Her face dropped in horror. "Alex," she whispered. Her eyes scanned me, my messy hair, my blackened hands, the faint smudge of oil on my slacks. "What happened? Are you hurt?" I tried calling. I opened my mouth to explain, but I didn't get the chance. Two figures stepped into the doorway behind her, Charles and Margaret Sinclair. They were everything Emma had warned me about. He looked like he'd walked out of a Brooks Brothers ad. Silver hair, navy smoking jacket, posture like a judge about to deliver a sentence. She was draped in diamonds and icy perfection, her face sharp with a lifetime of practiced disapproval. Charles didn't blink. "So this is him," he said flatly, "the mechanic." "I am so sorry for being late, sir," I began, heart pounding. "There was a woman, an emergency. Her Rolls-Royce had broken down on the road into the..." He held up a hand like I was a waiter offering tap water instead of sparkling. "We're not interested in excuses," he said coldly. "Punctuality is the bare minimum." Margaret stepped forward then, her gaze landing on my hands with theatrical disdain. "Emma told us you work with your hands," she said, her voice laced with venomous sweetness. "How charmingly rugged of you." They weren't just judging me, they were enjoying it. I stood there in silence, the words dying in my throat. My apology sounded ridiculous in my own head. Charles straightened his lapels. "I think it's best if we reschedule," he said, not to me but to his daughter. "For a time when your friend can present himself with a shred of dignity." He turned his back to me, dismissed, and that was it. My moment was over. I had lost before the evening had even begun. I turned to leave. But then, that sound, a deep, smooth, aristocratic rumble, and I knew it instantly. The sound of a Rolls-Royce silver cloud gliding into a driveway. That engine, that unmistakable low purr of power wrapped in elegance. It cut through the awkward silence like thunder on a calm lake. Everyone turned. The silver cloud I'd just brought back to life drifted up the drive like royalty returning from exile, headlights glowing, chrome sparkling. It came to a smooth stop behind my pickup truck. The Sinclairs froze. Charles frowned, confused. Margaret tilted her head, clearly annoyed by the interruption. Emma looked stunned. The driver's door opened. A man in a tailored black suit and cap stepped out, walked to the passenger side, and opened the rear door with the poise of a palace butler. And then, a hand appeared, elegant, pale, wrinkled only by time, not by weakness. A sapphire ring glittered under the porch lights. Then the woman stepped out. It was her, the same woman I'd helped on the roadside. Only now I realized she wasn't just anybody. Margaret gasped. "Mother, what on earth are you doing here?" I blinked. Mother? This was Margaret's mother, the matriarch of the Sinclair family? I had unknowingly just fixed the car, of the Queen herself. Emma whispered, "That's Grandma Helen." But Helen Sinclair wasn't looking at them. She was looking at me. Her piercing eyes swept over the scene. Charles with his back half turned, Margaret stiff as a mannequin, Emma clutching the doorframe in disbelief. Then her gaze landed on me, still standing there with grease-stained hands, feeling like I didn't belong. And something incredible happened. She smiled, not politely, not patronizingly. She smiled with recognition, with respect. Then in a voice sharp enough to carve stone, she said, "Charles, Margaret, step aside." They obeyed like schoolchildren. She walked right up to me, chin held high, her voice cutting through the air like a ceremonial sword. "This young man just spent an hour on the side of the road saving a piece of your family's history, while your driver got lost in daylight, while you," she turned to her daughter with narrowed eyes, "were busy judging grease stains." Margaret's face went pale. Charles coughed awkwardly. Helen wasn't done. She turned to me, took my arm firm, deliberate, and said, "Come along, Alex. I believe dinner is waiting, and I've had quite enough of shallow company for one day." I didn't walk through those front doors as a guest anymore. I walked in as the man on the arm of Helen Sinclair, and the air in that mansion shifted completely. If someone had told me hours earlier that I'd be entering the Sinclair mansion arm in arm with its matriarch, I would have laughed them off. But now I was walking through the grand foyer like a knight returning from battle with Lady Helen Sinclair leading the charge. The butler, a rail-thin man named Winston with eyebrows like quotation marks, glanced down at my stained hands, his face briefly twitching. But one look at Helen and he snapped to attention. "Please set another place," she said, her tone cool but commanding. At my right hand, Winston blinked, just once. That seat wasn't just near the matriarch. It was her seat of honor. We entered the dining room, a cathedral of mahogany and crystal. The chandelier above us twinkled like we were under the stars. The table could have hosted a royal delegation, yet tonight it was set for 5. Helen led me to my seat without a word. Charles and Margaret followed behind like reprimanded children. Emma trailed after them, her eyes bouncing between me and her grandmother, barely able to contain her shock. Dinner began in silence, until Helen spoke. "A 1963 silver cloud," she said, casually swirling her wine. "A magnificent creature, but her distributor wire is notoriously temperamental, isn't it, Alex?" I nodded. "Yes, ma'am, especially when aged rubber gets brittle." But the rest of the engine was in remarkable shape. Her eyes gleamed. "I thought so. And just like that, we were off. She didn't ask about my income, or my education, or my pedigree. She asked about carburetors. The lost art of hand-tooled components, the subtle music of an engine brought back to life. And I told her, not to impress, not to prove myself, but because for the first time that night, someone actually cared about who I was, not just what I wasn't. Charles tried to cut in once, forcing a laugh. Speaking of old classics, Mother, I've been monitoring the pre-war collector's market. Helen didn't even look at him. Charles, she said without blinking, let the man speak. He knows what he's talking about. He recoiled like he'd been slapped. Margaret tried a different angle. This duck was flown in from a French vineyard, Mother. I had it prepared by Chef Laurent. Helen raised a delicate eyebrow. A well-tuned engine is far more satisfying than any bird, Margaret. Emma, sitting across from me, looked like she might explode from holding in her laughter. And I just kept answering Helen's questions about torque curves and piston timing, as her children wilted in their own dining room. By the time the plates were cleared, the message was clear. The evening wasn't about them anymore, and neither was this family. Dessert hadn't even reached the table when Helen made her move. She set down her wine glass, leaned forward, and fixed her gaze directly on me. The warmth in her voice remained, but now it carried a new weight, something formal, almost ceremonial. Alex, she said, my late husband, Emma's grandfather, was a collector of rare automobiles. Passionate, obsessive, really. His collection sits untouched in our west garage. Dozens of classic vehicles, some irreplaceable. The room fell still. Charles stiffened. Margaret went pale. Helen continued, casually folding her napkin. No one in this family has the skill or desire to care for them. But you, she paused, eyes locking on mine, you have something that can't be bought. Not just knowledge, not just craftsmanship, but pride in your work, integrity. My heart skipped. Was she? I believe I've found the right man to restore that collection, she said. You'll be compensated generously, and you'll answer only to me. For a second, I couldn't breathe. Margaret dropped her spoon. Charles looked like someone had pulled the floor out from under him. Emma reached across the table, her hand brushing mine beneath the white linen. Her touch was electric and proud. I swallowed hard. Ma'am, I don't know what to say. That's an incredible honor. I'd be. She waved her hand. It's not a favor, Alex. It's a necessity. I won't let those machines decay while this family obsesses over appearances. You, my dear boy, see the soul in the metal. She smiled, slow and certain. You remind me of him, of the man who built this family's fortune, not by talking about legacy, but by building something real with his own two hands. Behind us, Charles tried to speak. Mother, you can't be serious. Helen turned her head just slightly, but in that single glance the room dropped 10 degrees. You are welcome, she said coolly, to continue playing your financial games, but leave the real legacy in capable hands. And just like that, the greasy mechanic they tried to dismiss had been placed in charge of the family's crown jewels. I hadn't just been accepted, I'd been chosen. As Helen finished speaking, the room sat in stunned, reverent silence, except for Charles and Margaret, who looked like statues carved from disbelief. But they weren't done. No, they had one more desperate stand to make. Later that evening, just as Emma and I were preparing to leave, still overwhelmed by everything that had happened, we heard hushed voices echoing from the grand foyer. Charles and Margaret had cornered Helen. Mother, Margaret hissed, you cannot be serious about giving him access to the West Garage. That collection is priceless. It's our family's heritage. Helen turned slowly, and the warmth she'd worn at dinner vanished like smoke. In its place was something colder, stronger, the steel beneath the pearls. Margaret, she said quietly, let me be perfectly clear. The silence was deafening. This family's heritage is not in its cars, or its china, or the art hanging on these walls. It's not in stock portfolios or gated estates. It's in character, in courage, in doing what's right, especially when it's inconvenient. She took a step forward. Alex has shown more of that in one evening than you and Charles have managed in a lifetime of cocktail parties and tax loopholes. Charles opened his mouth, but Helen silenced him with a glance. I trust him with your father's legacy, she said, her voice like a gavel. And if either of you has a problem with that, well, you're welcome to find the door. No threats, no theatrics, just the quiet, unstoppable force of a woman who knew exactly who held the real power in that house. She turned to me again, her eyes warm once more. Winston will give you the keys in the morning, she said. And Alex, her voice softened, have fun. I nodded, still half in shock. Yes, ma'am, I will. As we walked out into the night, Emma beside me, hand in mine, her eyes sparkled like I'd never seen them before. That night, everything changed. The next morning, I stood at the entrance of the West Garage with Winston by my side. He held out a heavy iron key. From Lady Sinclair, he said simply. She instructed me to tell you, to take your time. I opened the door like I was unlocking a treasure chest, because that's exactly what it was. Inside, the space was quiet, sacred. The scent of aged leather, oil, and old varnish filled the air like incense in a chapel. Under the dust and canvas covers were legends, pre-war Bugattis, vintage Jaguars, a cherry-red 1967 Mustang, even a forgotten 1932 Duesenberg with hand-etched detailing. It was a graveyard of history, waiting to be resurrected. Emma stood beside me, awe in her eyes. This is yours now," she whispered. "No," I said softly, running a hand over the sleek curve of a Bentley's fender. Day after day, I worked, restoring one engine at a time, coaxing the heartbeats back into metal. I worked with my hands, my sweat, and every ounce of passion I had. But here's where it gets even better. Helen insisted that Charles and Margaret attend private walkthroughs to understand the restoration process, she said with a perfectly straight face. They stood awkwardly in tailored suits while I, in my grease-covered overalls, explained the inner workings of a V12 engine. I showed them spark plugs, timing belts, pressure systems, each sentence laced with unspoken irony. I was no longer the punchline at their dinner table. I was the teacher. Helen would stand nearby, nodding approvingly, occasionally offering jabs disguised as compliments. "Isn't it fascinating, Margaret?" she'd say with a smile. "The artistry, the hands-on brilliance. Some might even say, noble work." Emma, meanwhile, beamed every time I opened that garage door, every time I wiped grease from my palms, every time she heard the thunderous purr of an engine that once lay dormant. And slowly, that mansion which had once felt like a museum of judgment became something else, a place where I was no longer tolerated, but trusted, needed, and quietly respected. Months passed. By spring, 5 of the cars in the West Garage were fully restored. Their engines sang again, their bodies gleamed like new. Helen would visit often, sometimes just to sit with a cup of tea, and listen as I tested the engines. Every time she smiled, it felt like a quiet nod from the universe, as if to say, "You were right to stop that day. You were right to be yourself." One cool evening, Emma and I took out the Jaguar E-Type, the same one Helen said her husband once called the love letter of British engineering. The sun was setting behind the hills, casting golden light across the road as we cruised through the countryside. She sat beside me, wind in her hair, hand resting on my arm. I turned to her, my heart full, and said, "Remember that night? How scared I was." Emma laughed gently. "You were scared. I was ready to fake a medical emergency." We both smiled, but the truth was, I had been terrified, of being judged, of being rejected, of not being enough. And yet in the end, the thing that changed everything wasn't charm, or a lie, or even trying to fit in. It was stopping on that road. It was doing what I knew was right, helping a stranger without expecting a thing in return. That simple moment of honesty, of being who I am at my core, had brought me into a family that once would have laughed me out of their foyer. It gave me purpose, a role, a voice. It taught me that you don't need to impress the world to earn your place in it. You just need to act with integrity when no one's watching. Today I'm still that same guy with oil under his nails and tools in his hands. But now I'm also the trusted steward of a legacy, a man who walks through the Sinclair estate with his head high, a husband, a craftsman, a son-in-law, and yes, still a mechanic. But one who earned his place not by changing who he was, but by standing firmly in it. Helen once told me something I'll never forget. It was late one night in the garage. She'd been quietly watching me restore the Duesenberg, her husband's favorite, and she said, "Alex, the men who built this country didn't wear silk gloves. They wore overalls. They didn't invest in futures. They built them with grit, grease, and grace." I never forgot that. Emma and I are building our life now. We still take those countryside drives, still share those small smiles across the dinner table, especially when Charles and Margaret quietly pass me the wine without a word. Their respect didn't come quickly, but it came, because it had no choice. I had proved something, not just to them but to myself. That real worth isn't measured by wealth, or clothing, or punctuality at a fancy dinner. It's measured by what you do when nobody's looking, by who you help when it costs you something, and by the strength to be yourself in rooms that never expected to make space for you. So to anyone out there feeling like they don't belong, like they're not enough for the world they're walking into, let me tell you something. You don't need to pretend. You don't need to hide the grease on your hands, because sometimes the thing they mock becomes the very reason they kneel. What did you think of Helen's final stand? Have you ever been underestimated, only to prove everyone wrong just by being yourself? Tell us your story in the comments. And if this touched something in you, please show your support by hitting that like button. It truly helps the channel reach more people who need to hear stories like this. Subscribe for more powerful tales of redemption, quiet justice, and unexpected triumphs. And remember, you are enough, just as you are. Thanks for watching.